Ever since I got Disney Plus, I've been binging the hell out of the 90s Marvel cartoons. I covered Hulk a little bit ago, so now it's Silver Surfer's turn. I ended up loving the show by the end of it, but that's not to say it's without its flaws. The show is extremely faithful to the comics and pays a lot of attention to getting that classic Jack Kirby look right. You see a lot of Kirby crackle, and a lot of the backgrounds and alien species are really faithful to that old school Kirby artwork, and I just love that. But where the animation and character design get kinda janky is with the introduction of 3D graphics. The mix of 3D and 2D looks really natural and cool in some places, like in the space battles, but then it looks really jarring and out of place in others. Like for some reason, every time Galactus shows up, he's a 3D model, and he looks super out of place in every scene that he's in. This dude looks like he walked straight out of a reboot. I think this technique was new at the time, and I'm really glad it got better by the mid-2000s, because shows like Invader Zim and Justice League use similar 3D models for animating their vehicles, but that always felt way more subtle than it does here. But outside of that, the animation, the character design, the background art, all of it's just beautiful. Sometimes there are minor inconsistencies and cost-cutting measures, like how the thickness on lines of characters will vary scene to scene, but I feel like those gripes are kind of nitpicky when I look at how good everything else in the show was. There's just so much love for the original Jack Kirby, Stan Lee era of classic Cosmic Marvel comics. Everything from the Watcher's narration to Silver Surfer's monologues, it all feels like they're ripped straight from the pages of a comic. And unlike other shows from the era, Silver Surfer feels a lot more like a comic book cartoon instead of watching a cartoon that's based on a comic book. And a lot of that has to do with the way that it utilizes the tropes and visual language of comic book storytelling, like its use of narration and perspective shift. When Silver Surfer gets incapacitated, the point of view in inner monologue changes to another adjacent character that gets pushed to the forefront of the narrative until Surfer wakes up and takes the reins again. These are things you see a lot in old school comics, but rarely make their way outside of them into the adaptations. But getting back to the art and aesthetics of the show, stuff like the Library of the Watchers looks like it walked straight out of a Jack Kirby book. So much so that it's a little bit uncanny. And that same episode delves a little bit into body horror stuff.
Surfer, Nebula was wrong. Those viral things didn't get her crew. They are the crew!
Come, join us. Oneness and knowledge await.
Nebula. Guitar.
I'm not quite sure where that came from. I'm not sure if that was Jack Kirby or not. I know the show took some inspiration from Mobius too, but what I'm getting at is what the show does with its comic book art style is just really unique and interesting comparatively to the other cartoons from the era. The show gets really trippy and psychedelic sometimes, which is fitting for a character like Silver Surfer, and I love that blend of psychedelic aesthetics and space opera. It makes for a great Silver Surfer cartoon, and a great take on the old school Cosmic Marvel universe and all the characters in it. Even though characters like the Guardians of the Galaxy are more mainstream now than ever before, when those characters pop up in this show, you might find them unrecognizable. And that's because the movie iterations of these guys were based on the 2008 comic book, and this show came out a good 10 years beforehand. So characters like Drax might have similar motivations, but their characterization and design are night and day comparatively to the modern iterations. I mean seriously, when was the last time you saw Drax looking like this? But getting to know these comic book characters as they were originally intended to be seen was really neat, because to be honest with you, I'm not well versed on pre-2000s Marvel outside major books like Infinity Gauntlet and Secret Wars, so I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to know these guys a little bit better. Gamora's characterization is a lot more villainous here, so it's neat to see a version of what the character was like pre-redemption arc. And Nebula is a lot more cruel and independently driven here. She's not just the brat little sister who could never measure up. She's a formidable foe all of her own. And finally, you got the big bad of them all, Thanos, who serves as the main antagonist of the series. His whole goal here is to simp for death, just like the old school comics.
My love, there are not words to describe how I feel now that you are with me at last.
Oh, no, no!
Honestly, Thanos is a lot more Saturday morning cartoon villain than I'm used to, but maybe that's because the MCU and DNA run were my only real exposure to the character outside the original Infinity Gauntlet comic. It's just a little bit jarring comparatively to modern takes, but it's still interesting to see a take that's a little bit more classic and gives you a greater appreciation for how far these characters have come in recent years. Outside of that, there are a ton of other references to Marvel characters and lore. Like in the first episode, you see this race of creatures that are seriously similar to the Groots of Planet X. And there are other Marvel characters here that haven't made their way into the MCU yet that get some great exposure here. Characters like the abstract cosmic entities, the Watcher, and even Pip the Troll. I mean seriously, this dude is so much fun in any book he shows up in. He's like my favorite part of the original Infinity Gauntlet comic, and it just breaks my heart that he wasn't in the movie. I mean, seriously, Peter Dinklage was right the fuck there. What the hell are you doing? He could have still been giant. That would have been fun.
The Silver Surfer.
The Kree slave troll?
Slave? Slave? Where? The name's Pip. I'm showing the surfer around.
I failed, Mentor. I'm sorry.
The show establishes important bits of cosmic Marvel lore, like the Kree Skrull War and its influence on cosmic politics. But unlike a lot of shows, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, its cosmic lore isn't bogged down by that war is just a part of it. In other Marvel media, the Kree Skrull War is all you see of space. Even the MCU kind of suffers from this. But that's a non-issue for the Silver Surfer. I mean, I seriously love all the species and characters and lore that's featured here. Especially, holy fuck, is that Beta Ray Bill? I fucking love Beta Ray Bill! The Beta Ray Bill episode has a lot of deviation from the character's typical super soldier, last surviving member of his species origin story. But in spite of that deviation, it's still a really solid episode, and it's a really fun adaptation of the character. Even if it isn't anywhere near his comic origin, it's still fun to just see the character acknowledged and featured in any capacity. I mean, seriously, I fucking love this guy. Look at him, he's Thor, he's a horse. He's a Thorse. Characters like Adam Warlock show up too, and even though some of these cosmic Marvel characters have different origins than the comics they're based on, the core of these characters stays pretty much the same. And it's awesome to see them acknowledged and used in the context of how they were before the MCU, especially considering that the comics have changed to suit the MCU in recent years. You know, not that Adam Warlock has made his way into the MCU yet, not any more now than he did in Dark World anyway. I just love seeing the more abstract cosmic entities like Infinity and Death play a role here too. In DC, cosmic stuff is pretty much all Green Lanterns, Lobo, New Gods, and Krypton. But in Marvel, there's so much more space opera, and there's a much more interesting hierarchy of like cosmic godlike entities. Marvel has races like the Celestials and the Watchers, the Eternals, the Inhumans. There's just a much more diverse cosmic landscape amongst the different alien species that the heroes end up interacting with. And for a character like Silver Surfer, you really need that. The show does a really good job showing off what makes the cosmic side of Marvel so unique. From adopting its storytelling tropes, to adapting its characters, and showcasing how they can stand on their own without needing to cross over with all the Earth characters like the Avengers or Spider-Man. But speaking of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, let's talk about how this show measures up to the others of the era.
Hey, listen!
I already talked a little bit about how the blend of 2D and 3D makes the art style of a cartoon feel a little bit jarring, but I feel like there's more worth noting. Because the art style is beautiful, but the animation feels rushed and clunky comparatively to a lot of the other 90s Marvel cartoons like Fantastic Four, X-Men, Spider-Man, and Hulk. It's just that Silver Surfer has a lot of reused and repurposed scenes episode to episode. It feels so cheap for a show that's so beautiful. But I mean, again, what really makes the show stand out is its usage of cosmic landscapes and alien terrain. Across all the 90s Marvel cartoons, whenever the heroes do battle, it's always in some generic forest or desert or high-tech lab where everything is blue and gray, or the same reused New York back alleyway or building top, and it makes the settings of those shows feel very samey and boring after a while. But that's not an issue for Silver Surfer at all. Every episode is a new environment, a new species, something new and visually interesting that we've never seen before, and that really makes it stand out compared to the other shows from the era. There's that one episode about the Watcher's library, and it just goes above and beyond showcasing all the trippy cosmic sci-fi stuff from the show. And you know what? So does the episode Radical Justice, which might be my favorite in the series. The episode features Silver Surfer being put on trial for all the destruction caused by Galactus, only for chaos to ensue afterwards, and for Silver Surfer to save the very people who would have condemned him to death just moments beforehand. Wait, didn't Justice League do pretty much the same episode a few years later? It had been about a decade since the last time I saw the cartoon, and I had a lot of fun revisiting it. Hell, I didn't even realize the same characters from this cartoon were half the cast of Guardians of the Galaxy when I was reintroduced to those characters a half-decade later. So going back and revisiting the show now with an expanded knowledge of the Marvel Universe made the show that much more enjoyable than the first time I watched it. But speaking of the first time I watched it, the first time I saw the show, it was through bootleg uploads of it to YouTube, and honestly, those 360p versions that were split into 3 parts for every episode might have looked better than the Disney Plus version. For some reason, the Disney Plus versions of all the 90s Marvel cartoons just look bad. So I obtained a copy of the show from some sort of DVD or streaming release, and the files that I got looked so much better than the ones on Disney Plus. So like back in the day, day, and by back in the day I mean like around 2011, I didn't watch YouTube for YouTubers. I watched YouTube to find bootleg uploads of old cartoons and Japanese episodes of Super Sentai with English subtitles. I mean, seriously, I watched the entire Friday the 13th film series, every individual movie, all 10 or so, with each one broken up into 10-minute increments split into 16 individuals. And I did that for every movie in the series, and you bet your ass I attempted it for every Marvel cartoon back in the day too, because that's just what life was like in 2010 before I learned about torrenting. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is that Disney Plus really needs to up their standards with the video quality for these old cartoons, because I've noticed the same problem with Hulk, Spider-Man, Silver Surfer, and Iron Man now. I haven't tested X-Men yet, but I'm sure it's going to be a problem there too. But you know what, just for the hell of it, I'm going to put a comparison on screen. On the left is a screenshot from Disney Plus, on the right is the same screenshot from the version that I obtained. I really don't know why it's like this. If I had to guess, the ones that I obtained were from a higher quality digital re-release or a Blu-ray, and what they put on Disney Plus was an archived version of it, but I really just don't know.
The world may never know.
I know there were some issues with the order of episodes in Spider-Man the Animated Series, and HBO Max's Superman re-release had some pretty glaring errors in its animation as well, so hopefully the streaming services will work these kinks out as time goes along. But if you want to watch the show in the best quality it could possibly be, then maybe find an alternative to the Disney Plus iteration for now. I'm not advocating for anything, but you know, that's all I'm saying.
To me, my boy!
The road to the show's finale is a complete trip, and the last few episodes are some of the best in the series. Like, the series starts off really mid, but by the end of it, it's a solid 8 out of 10. So in the end, the cosmic entities, Eternity and Infinity, are calling upon the Silver Surfer to use his power cosmic to stop Thanos and his new reality-destroying weapon. A weapon that will reverse time all the way back to the Big Bang. That way Thanos can unalive everyone. That way he can impress his mistress, Madame Lady Chaos, or Death. I forget what the show calls her. The show didn't call her Death, but she's supposed to be Death. We all know that. One of the more interesting things about the show's take on Thanos is that they do a really good job playing up Thanos' comic motivations. Whereas movie Thanos was motivated by some galactic eugenics depopulation bullshit, this version has a lot more in common with Thanos' core motivation in the comics, which is just to appease Lady Death and get her to fall in love with him, even though she never will. Thanos is the world's biggest simp. No, Thanos is the galaxy's biggest simp, and this show does a damn good job driving that home. So Silver Surfer is the only one who can stop Thanos, because for whatever reason, his power cosmic makes him immune, and no one else's power cosmic does, because plot. So time is reversing all across the galaxy, and eventually blips back to the Big Bang, and all of a sudden reality is no more. The only things left are Silver Surfer, Galactus, and Lady Chaos in the infinite abyss. And then the show ends. Like, it just ends. It's over. There's nothing else. That's the last episode. It ends on a cliffhanger. It's called Part 1, but there is no Part 2. Part 2 was supposed to be the first episode for Season 2, and that never got made. Like, I'm serious. Silver Surfer spends the entire series searching for his lost love, watches her die like 3 damn times in 13 episodes, and then the show just fucking ends. So if you like this video, be sure to subscribe for more Super Swim Team 7 content in the future. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to check out more videos of Marvel cartoons, like my video on Hulk the Animated Series, or Spectacular Spider-Man and Earth's Mightiest Heroes. You can watch those here. And I'd also like to give a shout out to my lovely supporters on Patreon. And as always, stay super, Swim Team. This has been Swim Team Captain 7, ending on a cliffhanger.